Okay, so yeah, my name's Stuart Woollard. I co-founded something called the Maturity Institute 2.5 years ago. And a group of us, there was 5 of us that founded it originally from various parts of the world, and we all sort of shared a common view, which is that we didn't believe organisations were getting anywhere near the kind of value that they could get from their human capital. And I'll talk about human capital. We talk about human capital in a much wider sense than just your own workforce, because you can get value out of lots of human capital and risk. So we felt there wasn't anywhere near the kind of value that organisations were getting, but also organisations didn't really understand how to get that value. How do people connect to value? And it's been a topic of mine that I've dwelled on for quite a long time. My latest, the job I've done before the Maturity Institute and OMS was at King's College, and trying to find evidence of how people connect to value. Because I always felt that evidence was a good thing, and when you talk to a CEO, it was always good to provide evidence because usually you could have a sensible discussion. And they would sit you down and listen to you. So organisations weren't and still don't get anywhere near the kind of value, and they don't really know how to do it very well. And I think there's lots of examples of that today. Through the Institute, we work a lot with HR people who say, oh, that's quite interesting, can we learn more about it? So we try and teach HR professionals about what we do, about the idea of organisational maturity, so that they can go back into their own organisation and start to bring it to life a bit. We have tried to engage with the C-suite, and we've done that to some extent, but they're a very resistant group. And our strategy in the last 12 years has been to work with the investment community. So most of my work today is working with fund managers, pension funds, and getting them to understand why human capital is incredibly important. And there is a growing appetite for getting their heads around this because they understand that it's pretty important. When something like Tesco happens, there is an increasing understanding that that's a human issue. It's not a process issue, it's not a financial issue. Deloitte won't fix it by finding the financial hole. It needs to be fixed because, through the culture. So Dave Lewis is, how do I fix this culture? And we can talk about that if you've got any questions. So that's the sort of underlying premise. Our starting point, and really what I'm going to talk to you about today, and it fits with the branding perspective, is what are our organisations here for? What's their purpose? What's their value motive? We call it value motive. We spend lots of time talking about what value is and what the value motive of an organisation is. This is a book called The Puritan Gift, and it's kind of a core text for us. And really, it's a fascinating story of management practice from the early Puritan migration to North America, how that fed into the early organisations, and how that is still with us today to some extent. But primarily, the hypothesis here is that organisations have lost their way. And they lost their way in the latter half of the 20th century. And this is the quote which I find quite nice, and I'll read it to you. The paradox is that by not pursuing profitability to the exclusion of all else, the great engine companies in their golden age would achieve enormous increases in value. Whereas by single-mindedly pursuing profit, these same companies and their successors actually created less genuine, lasting wealth. Indeed, they would often destroy it. Okay? When we start to look at a lot of organisations today, the value motive is still largely profit-driven. It's still about shareholders. It is still about growing the financials of an organisation. And as we'll talk about, that can lead to lots of outcomes which are actually not in the interest of shareholders, and they're certainly not in the interest of customers or indeed wider society. We recently just did a sector analysis on pharmaceuticals, and there's a lovely quote by George Merck, who ran Merck in the early part of the 20th century, and he says, "We make medicines for people." When we remember that, when we remember that we're here to make medicines for people, we make profit. In fact, the more we remember that we're here to make medicines for people, the more profit we make. And that's, in a nutshell, what we believe. Those organisations who have a value motive which is societal in dimension tend to be more sustainably valuable over time. They tend to be the more mature organisations that we hold up as exemplars. And when you think about a value motive in a human context, how important is that? It's the first question we ask of an organisation, because it's so important in terms of how that plays out, in terms of how people feel, how people will behave, and how people perform for their organisation. I'll give you some examples, won't go through the whole slide. I've been talking about Costco for about 6 or 7 years. There was a wonderful paper in 2006 now. It's still highly relevant today by a guy called Wayne Cascio. He's a US academic, and particularly if you work in retail, I would urge you to read it. His work was picked up a little bit by Zeynep Ton, who wrote a book called The Good Job Strategy. And really it was saying, look at Costco and look at Walmart Sam's Club. Walmart Sam's Club is a direct comparator. They directly compete with one another. And look at their business strategy. Walmart's business strategy, its value motive, is all about driving cost out of the organisation. Low prices, driving cost out, profit maximisation. Costco's strategy is very different. Costco's strategy is one of delivering low-cost products, but fundamentally trusting our people to deliver that to our customers. So Costco pays people more, it grows people's careers, it grows them professionally and personally, and fundamentally it realises a huge amount of value from that strategy, time and time again. One of the best metric in the paper is one around inventory shrinkage. The industry average is around 1.5% to 2%, if you care to go and find out what the industry average of inventory shrinkage. And a lot of it, if not most of it, is employees nicking stuff, stealing stuff. Walmart are highly secretive about inventory shrinkage. They're very nervous about that number, which kind of gives you in a sense that it's probably not a pleasant one. So we can assume probably that Walmart's inventory shrinkage is at least, you know, in the industry average band. At Costco, it's 0.2%. Now you think about that for a $50 billion company and what the number is, and that becomes huge. Now my question to the CEO is look, you know, who's nicking your stuff and why? Often at Walmart, people are paid poorly, they're treated badly. If a union is going to arise, they close the whole thing and leave the city. Costco is completely the opposite of that. If you then look at the share price performance, Costco has trounced Walmart over the last 10 plus years. It trades at a multiple almost double of Walmart. The investors love it. The margins are the highest one of the highest in the sector. It's the most human of those large supermarket retailers. Yet financially, it's arguably the most successful. Toyota. Toyota are a maturity exemplar who clearly understand the importance of human capital. It is 3 to 4 times more valuable than General Motors, yet they make the same amount of cars, pretty much. So the question is, why is that? They realise the value of their people. The innovation rate, Toyota measure innovation. There are very few companies that measure innovation. And Toyota's measure is to say, if we get one idea per employee per year, if everybody comes up with one idea, that's 100%. So one idea from every employee is 100% rate of innovation. Toyota runs at around 500% every year. Pfizer run at about 0.32%. At least they measure it. The other pharma companies don't. So you can get a sense of how much value we're getting from our own human capital simply in translating ideas to improvements in our organisation. The last one I just mentioned, Handelsbanken. We've just done an analysis of, I'm in the middle of writing an analysis for the banks, and we looked at Handelsbanken. Handelsbanken are very interesting. Does anyone bank with Handelsbanken? No, they have about 200 branches in the UK, interestingly. A very, very human bank. They don't pay bonuses. They don't pay bonuses. You get a salary, and everybody then gets a share of the profits, which they can't take until they're 60. You look at Barclays, RBS, everybody else, it's a very much a bonus culture. More importantly, Handelsbanken have maintained that human beings are fundamental to sustainable value. That doesn't mean they don't have an app. It doesn't mean they don't embrace internet banking. They do. They do all that stuff. But they believe it's humans which create value. It's humans which can create value from customer relationships. Handelsbanken have the highest margins in the business, the highest operating and profit margins in the business. Interesting. So, Handelsbanken, Toyota and Costco, their value motive is not profit. Their value motive is societal. You go to Handelsbanken and look at what it talks about, what's important. The community is important. They talk about profit in the context of serving the community, not themselves, not the shareholders, but the community. Profitability is a source of stability, not a source of wealth creation for the senior executive team. Toyota are the same. Toyota are about making the best quality cars or transport at the lowest possible price, increasingly with a minimal harm to the environment. Toyota, as you may know, are one of the leading innovators in terms of moving away from fossil fuels. Patagonia, similar philosophy. We make the best possible product at the lowest possible cost with the minimum harm to the environment. So we look at cost in its widest possible context. We would rather you repair your outdoor coat than go and buy another one. Phenomenally financially successful. Those organisations, their value motive is societal. On the flip side, Walmart is about cost. Look at BP, stripping cost out of the business. What happens? What happens when you strip cost out of the business and the finance team are the ones that drive that cost cutting? Stuff happens. Quality is eroded. We lose value. We introduce risk to our organisation, real human risk. This is our value motive. And actually, when you see this, it's one part of a much bigger whole system framework that we have for looking at value and how human capital connect to value. So our value motive sits at the top. It's very important, but all the other things are linked. I'll talk very quickly about a couple of them. We look at learning. To what extent is an organisation a true learning organisation? And that means not about how many training days we give our staff. It's about how we use knowledge, how we acquire it, how we disseminate it, how we connect it to value. The most mature organisations are true learning organisations. Goldman Sachs knows that knowledge is power, knowledge is source of value. Okay? That's why collaboration is so important. That's why sharing knowledge is so important. That's why decision making is so important in terms of making the best possible decisions to generate the most possible value. Improvement philosophy. All these organisations have an embedded sense of we have to improve every single day and we expect everybody to do it. It's almost like hardwiring innovation into our culture. Okay? And we measure it. Performance system. What's it like to perform? What is performance in our organisation? If you go to a pharmaceutical organisation, you'll get a lot of rhetoric saying our value motive is about serving the needs of the world, providing medicines and great health care for the benefit of people. When you look at what performance really is, it's largely financial performance. Look at what the CEO gets paid. Pascal Soriot at AstraZeneca is paid a huge bonus based upon earnings per share. What he did recently was sell a lot of rights to drugs that are in the pipeline to other drugs companies for many, many millions of dollars. And he said that was important because we need collaboration to bring these drugs to market. A lot of the analysts were saying he's just engineering figures to hit his EPS numbers. He's selling the family silver, or parts of the family silver. And what's true, who knows? But when somebody is rewarded to that level in that way, questions are being asked about what really drives these organisations. What is it really about? Communication, the integration of business and people strategy. HR strategy should not follow, should not support the business. HR strategy should be truly entwined. If you're going to go and buy a company, you need to be around the table making that decision with the CEO, helping the organisation to make that decision. If the decision's made and you're picking up the pieces, you're going to end up with all kinds of stuff you have to deal with. Okay? Those most mature organisations understand that human decisions, human capital decisions, have to be made alongside business decisions. Okay? I don't think it's enough for HR strategy to align itself or support business strategy. It needs to be truly integrated. We measure this stuff. We try and measure this stuff in a way that is meaningful. And particularly when we're working with the investment community, we want to show how organisations are capable in terms of human capital management and the value impact and the risk issues that arise. So we measure this, but it's not about metrics. It's not just about numbers. Okay? And this is where it's really important for HR people not to get hung up on metrics and analytics. Evidence is really important. Evidence needs to connect to value. But equally, this is an art. We need to observe what's going on. We need to see what's going on. We can't ask the right questions unless we do that. We can't interpret the data in the right way unless we are good artists, as well as, to some extent, understanding some of the science. I'm a bad scientist, but I know people who are good at it. If they're around the table, I think I'm better at interpreting it than others. But it's that combination which is important. HR is getting so hung up on metrics and analytics, you're starting to see the substitution for data and it's another reason to get rid of HR. Because we can just give metrics to our line managers. But can our line managers interpret it? Is it good data? Does it make sense? So we measure this stuff. We joint ventured with a credit rating agency, a Standard & Poor's credit rating agency. And we designed a rating. We rate organisations on their human capital management capability. For the first time, we are putting up our hand and saying, we believe we can rank organisations in terms of their ability to get value from human capital. Okay? You can see the live index. It's there. We've got about 75 to 80 companies now, and this is our list. This has allowed us to talk to investment community, because suddenly, if you say somebody's AAA or somebody's BB plus, people start to listen to you. People start to say, why is that? How does that? Why is Costco good? Why is Reckitt Benckiser better than Unilever? Why does Unilever ranks lower than Reckitt Benckiser? When you look at Reckitt Benckiser, you look at how they manage human capital. You look at how innovation is so embedded in that organisation. You look at what they measure. There's a huge difference. And then you look at things like sustainability. Reckitt Benckiser scores better than Unilever. But you look at Unilever and you would think that Unilever were the most sustainable FMCG business in the world, because they've been on this huge program, and I'm sure a lot of its success. Reckitt Benckiser are scoring better and actually getting more value from their own human capital because they understand how to do it better. Look at the margins. RB, their operating margin trounces Unilever's. It makes more money, but it's more human. It leverages its human capability much better than Unilever. And that's how we rank these organisations. So it's not looking at traditional HR, it's looking at the whole system. Human capital isn't just about your workforce, it's about your suppliers. Do your suppliers align with your value motive? If you're at TfL, one of you might be, do your suppliers align with your value motive to keep London moving? Or are they working with you to make as much money as possible from TfL? And just to wrap up, when we start to see mature companies and we start to put them in the list, what do we start to find? We start to see that they are role models. Okay? And then the brand emerges. So you look at some of these companies: high trust cooperation and informed decision making, learning, knowledge and innovation, best sustainable resource use, more inclusive workplaces, and embedded societal value and responsibility. When you look at Toyota, everybody's been trying to copy Toyota for decades and decades. VW were doing it in December, because I met some people from VW. We're still trying to copy Toyota. I met somebody from Morgan Stanley who said, we've just given up trying to copy Goldman Sachs, because we can't do it. Because this stuff is really hard. Once you get there, this is long-term value creation. It's also long-term competitive differentiation. And these companies have got that. Dave Lewis is now trying to copy Costco. Tesco rates down quite low on our list. Costco's quite high. And he said, we need to look at Costco. Now, does he know how to take Tesco to Costco? Maybe some of it, but that's a long journey. That's a long journey. And it's a hard one. These companies, have been doing this stuff for a long time. But if you can do it, then the brand which emerges is a very, very powerful one. And people copy Patagonia. people copy Toyota, Costco, Goldman Sachs, Tata, Southwest Airlines. Ryanair tried, O'Leary copied Southwest, but decided not to copy the love thing because he said Europe's not interested in love. But when Carolyn McCall decided that love did matter, and EasyJet have been financially successful massively in the last 5 or 6 years, and Ryanair issued some profit warnings, Michael O'Leary says, maybe love does matter. And to that point, he won't now unnecessarily piss you off when you fly. What to do next? Well, you can ask me lots of questions. You can come and learn about this stuff. One of the recent things we've launched in the last week is we've got a human capital reporting template. Company reporting on human capital is dire, very limited, largely around rudimentary metrics. And we've decided we need to try and do something about this, because if we can get organisations to understand what they need to measure, how they need to report on it, and as you can imagine, this is the sort of thing that the investment community are really interested in. You know, we want some stuff we can get hold of and embed in our valuation models and how we make decisions on whether to hold stock or not. Or even if we do hold stock because it's a great business model, what we might want to ask of the CEO to realise even more value and minimise risk. I've got one copy of this with me today. Form an orderly queue at the front if you want it. There's also online, there's a document which explains some of the lessons we've got from doing the index work. So it's worth pulling that up and just having a read through that. It goes into a bit more detail about what I've just talked to you. So have I massively gone over my 20 minutes?
Very good.
Yeah?
Very good.
Thank you very much.